Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to record a short little session for you on our topic this week, which is relativism. You notice on the syllabus it says torturing babies for the fun of it and the nature of morality. So basically, this is just going to be a critique of relativism. And there are several alternatives of moral absolutism, moral objectivity, which are actually two different things. There's virtue ethics, utilitarianism, natural law. There's all kinds of different systems, and all of them have their merits, and all of them have very smart people who follow these systems. Relativism, as one of my teachers once said, that everything that we can learn in philosophy has some kind of value, except relativism. Relativism is the dumbest idea, according to Dr. Baggett, who was the one who said that. Um, I kind of agree with him there, but I do think it can be used as a bad example. I think we can learn some things from relativism. I think it ultimately fails, and yeah, this is one of those short lectures where I'm actually going to tip my hat on what my position is. I think it ultimately fails and it is indefensible. I think you can still be a moral anti-realist and all these other things, but you're still going to have to come up with something better than just relativism because it defeats its own goals. So it is self-referentially incoherent. And let's get into why in just a minute. But first, let me just lay out relativism. Relativism is basically where morality is just relative to either culture or to the individual. So you can take cultural relativism, and you can say, well, my culture, we do certain things. You know, you look people in the eye when they're talking to them, or you give people a firm handshake. Whatever else. These different signs of respect that we show. We insert whatever American general morality is. And that's good for, us Americans. Now, people who live in some other places, I don't know, the Samoan Islands or South Carolina or some, exotic place like that, they've got their own morality and whatever else. And it seems to be something different. And so you would say, well, your morality is good for you guys here in America, and you guys over here on Easter Island or whatever, you guys are doing you, and yeah, it's different, but you're right as long as you're looking to your cultural values to figure out what is right for you to do. And when you violate your cultural values, then that's when you are doing something immoral for relativism. So, this has quite a long history. If you look at the PowerPoint, I just put it on Blackboard. It starts with Herodotus, ancient historian. He's actually the first historian. Greek, lived in the Persian Empire. Tells the story of these Indians from the Indian subcontinent, the Calatians, who would, for their burial customs, they would boil their dead relatives and drink the broth. So yeah, they're drinking grandma soup basically. And so they're part of the Persian Empire, and there's also some Greeks there. If you guys have seen the movie Troy, you'll notice there at the end, spoiler alert, Achilles dies. But literally, you've had 2,500 years to know that Achilles died in the Battle of Troy. So, not really a spoiler. Shame on you for not knowing that. Um, anyway, he's dead. What do? They put him on a funeral pyre and they cremate him. They burn his body. So Darius, the king of Persia, asks the Calatians. He's like, "Hey, you guys think you'll, maybe burn your ancestors on a funeral pyre?" And they're like, "No, about to rend their garments or something. May it never be. We would never do something like this." And that's just horrible for them. And then he turns to the Greeks using an interpreter as well and says, so you guys gonna eat grandma? A little barbecue sauce, a little salt and pepper. I don't know. And again, they're ready to pull out their beards and say, "Please don't ever say anything like that again." So basically, Darius comes up with the maxim that custom is king over all, and so the Galatians, in their own customs, their own culture, they're good, they're doing them, and the Greeks, they're over here, they're doing them, and everything's hunky dory. So your morality is relative to culture. Um, and so on the surface, it's like, okay, yeah, yeah, that seems right because, man, I've met people from the Congo and I've met people from Rwanda and these other places have very different customs than I did, and they relate to everything, and they wanted to take a nap in the middle of the day and whatever else. Um, so okay, yeah, they're doing them. They've got their own customs, so it's right for them, but it's maybe not right for an American or whatever in our culture. So on the surface, that seems to be the cultural relativism seems to make sense, and a lot of people are um, really happy about it, and they say, yeah, this is what we should all ascribe to, because if we're doing this, then we're going to tolerate and respect other cultures. But there's the problem right there. Think about this: you've got two cultures, one antagonistic, the other one peaceful. So which one should respect each other's culture? So you're saying, all right, well, these guys, they invade this place of the peacemakers. Well, okay, great. Well, should the peacemakers, should they try and be peaceful, or should they become more warlike? Should they respect the warlike customs of the others now that they live together? Should the other ones subjugate the little peacemakers? I don't know. It doesn't really tell us about when these different cultures clash. And if you really think about it, one of the things that is incoherent about relativism is if you say each culture has its own version of morality and they're all right in their own contexts. And because of that, we should all tolerate each other. Well, if all morality is relative, and you're saying, hey, well, here's this principle that we should all, that transcends all of these things, which is tolerance, then you actually have some something that is not relative. And so ultimately, just based on that one principle of relativism, it fails because you're saying morality does not transcend culture. Morality transcends culture. And if you guys remember from the very first class, we talked about the law of non-contradiction. You cannot have both A and not A at the same time in the same way. This forms a contradiction. So you're already on shaky ground here. And we talked about some of this stuff earlier in our talk about the moral argument for God's existence, because this kind of has to do with that was based on moral realism or whatever. This is mainly just a critique of moral relativity. So think about the Nazis. Nobody likes the Nazis. The Nazis are bad. The Nazis are the biggest jerks in history, right? Well, if cultural relativism is true, then we're just going to have to say, well, it was right for the Nazis to do because all they did was they consulted their cultural mores and with their values, and well, that was okay for them. Now, for the Poles, not so much. For the Jews, not so much. For Gypsies, not so much. So, if we're going to say, hey, the Nazis are assholes, then, well, we can't use cultural relativism. Cultural relativism ultimately fails in that sense because you cannot criticize other cultures, since a culture, for cultural relativism, only has to look for its own ideals and its own values and to see what is right. Right? So, relativism fails right then and there because you can't criticize the Nazis. You can't criticize, the Mongol hordes killing 20 million people, or the KKK or whatever else. So that seems to be another huge criticism that I don't think is surmountable. Then you've got another one called the Reformer's Dilemma, and you'll remember this one from the moral argument from God for God's existence. This is where you take someone like Jesus or Gandhi or Martin Luther King, um, you know, Muhammad, even any of these people who are trying to reform their cultures, and they're saying, hey, you guys are doing something that isn't right. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, he said, okay, segregation is wrong, and I want to change that. Well, according to cultural relativism, he should have just looked at the cultural values of his society in the 1950s and 1960s, and then he should have followed those. Well, at the time, it was that segregation was okay because the vast majority of people in this country apparently were okay with it. Most of those people in this country were white. Most of them hadn't lifted a finger to change anything with segregation, so they're at least implicitly okay with it, right? You see where this is going? So that means that Martin Luther King Jr., according to cultural relativism, would be the villain. He'd be the bad guy because he's the one who is flouting the cultural values and norms of his society. Same thing for Jesus, same thing for Muhammad, same thing for Gandhi. Any of these people who are trying to change their culture are actually the bad guys. So I don't think we want to say Hitler was okay for doing whatever he did because it was just part of his culture, and Martin Luther King Jr. Was bad because he wasn't consulting his cultural values. Well, I don't want to be that guy, so I think relativism fails. Um, and then you could make the argument, all right, well, Martin Luther King was a black man in the South, so he had a smaller culture. He wasn't part of the broader American culture, so we can just look at black culture in the South. Okay, yeah, he was also was he from Georgia? I can't remember. So he's also from a certain state, from a certain town, a member of a certain family. So what culture? Broadly Southern culture, that specific state, that specific region's culture, his individual family culture. There's you can boil it down to the individual, actually. So, subculture upon subculture upon subculture. Eventually, it's going to boil down to the individual, and individual relativism suffers from all of those same critiques of cultural relativism, but also if it's just up to the individual, then there's really no morality whatsoever. I can just say, this is cool for me, and well, sorry that sucks if it's not cool for you, but in my own individual morality, this is what I like to do. I like to cheat on tests, and I like to knock over liquor stores or whatever. What have you? Anything goes if that's the case. So it seems cultural and moral relativism are are both on very, very shaky grounds, and I think they're ultimately defeated. Moral progress, from the abolition of slavery to the banning of um, segregation, complete political enfranchisement for African Americans in this country. We want to say that's moral progress, right? Well, for relativism, not so much. It's just we're just a long string of events. Really, there's no rhyme or reason. There's no getting better and better. Tolerance of other cultures cannot meaningfully be praised because, well, if it's not part of your culture or part of your individual morality to tolerate, then how can I criticize you? So that doesn't really seem to help at all. So if cultural relativism is false, you've got plenty of other alternatives. And yes, you can talk about the South Solomon Islands and them, um, killing people and whatever else, for the Eskimos putting their elderly onto the ice floes in the springtime or whatever. Well, actually, there's a lot of things that actually do transcend those cultures. Like I was saying earlier, we've got our shaking hands, looking people in the eye, or whatever. That's a show of respect. Well, in other cultures, if you were in Kenya, you would not look one of your elders in the eye. Um, I believe it's Kenya. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, you don't look at your betters in the eye. You look down and you speak to them respectfully, whatever. So the thing that transcends both of those, looking someone in the eye, not looking someone in the eye, is it is a matter of respect. Think about the Indians and the Greeks again in Darius's court. Well, you've got both of them having a respect for the dead, a respect for their elders. That's what they're doing. They just manifest it in different ways. The Eskimos putting their elderly out on the ice floes. That's actually a protection of children and protection of the tribe. So if you've got someone who is infirm, someone who's sick, who can't live the migratory lifestyle, uh, with very, very few resources, that's probably going to end up killing them anyway. This seems to be a more merciful thing for them to, and also to protect the younger members of the tribe, because those are valuable resources that could go to people who can still contribute or will contribute in the future. So, am I saying it's right? I don't know. That's up for you guys to decide. And then I think we can also say some cultures are just wrong. The Nazis were wrong. The Ku Klux Klan is wrong. Neo Nazis are bad. ISIS is bad. Insert the bad people here, whatever. Um, so I cannot meaningfully say those things if cultural relativism is true, unless it's just part of my culture. But for us to actually be able to say, hey, we should all recognize that the Nazis were bad and that them invading Poland and Eastern Europe and killing all these millions of people was bad and wrong, then we're going to have to go with something other than relativism. So, I think there are certain things that do transcend culture: prohibitions against murder, the protection of children, propensity towards truthfulness. I think all of those things, and there's probably a couple more somewhere on the PowerPoint that I think transcend all cultures. And yes, some cultures can be sick and be dying and doing wrong things. But in general, you're going to find cultures at least having these certain things that transcend um, their culture and any other culture. So that's my shtick here on cultural relativism. I think it ultimately fails, but I think the one thing it does try to do, it fails at this, but it tries to show us that respect and toleration are a good thing, and also that we can maybe look at other cultures and say, hey, this is the way they do it. That's a really cool way. Maybe there's something wrong with my culture. Maybe I should change to be more like these people. So I think the toleration and the respect for other cultures that they try to use doesn't work with their system, but I think it is something that we can learn from them. That's what they try to do, and that's what we should do, is at least be open minded towards other cultures and all that stuff. So that's it on this. And if you have any questions, email me. Check out the PowerPoint, check out the reading, and I will see you next week.